Shooting the shiznit, shooting the shiznit. Best little wrestling podcast in the business. Your host BT and all his guests. You'll never know who he'll have next. Shooting the shiznit, shooting the shiznit. Best little wrestling podcast in the business. Shooting the shiznit.
All right. We're live from 304 Studios in Jonesboro, Arkansas. This is an STSPod.club production. This is the 7th annual, all episodes, Memphis in May. And believe it or not, this is a leftover episode. We're in June, but it's still Memphis in May. And this is the flagship show, Shooting the Shiznit. My guest, I'm going to have to do it, Barnabas, is Barnabas. He's either the leader, the ringmaster, tippy top, the entertainer. Welcome, Barnabas. I'm BT, and that's Barnabas over there. How's it going, man?
I have heard many an impression of yours truly, but that, by and far, was the worst impression of my exquisite voice that I've ever heard.
I'll have you do it by the end of the show. We'll have you do the real version.
It's about time somebody came on this show to take you to the tippy top of the YouTube scene, if you know what I mean.
Oh man, you have blasted on to Memphis wrestling. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But as I do on Shooting the Shiznit, the flagship show, I either bring somebody I've known forever in the business, and we just sat down since I'm an old fart, been around since 1978 watching wrestling. So I bring somebody that I've known forever or someone I've never met. We have never crossed paths, even with you being in the area. Never. So here we go. Growing up, tell us about Barnabas growing up as a fan.
So growing up a fan, I am originally from upstate New York. So you can tell why the Memphis Mizarks are so infuriating to me, because I have to step down, lower myself to even try to communicate between the almost Queen's English that's spoken in a great state, the Empire State of New York, compared to the Mizark mumblings of the Memphis wrestling fans. But as I was growing up a youngster in New York, believe it or not, my first exposure to professional wrestling was through world-class championship wrestling.
Was it on late night one after Star Trek or something? For me, that's what it was. It was after Star Trek.
There were many promotions after, including Bill Watts' UWF, that was like that. But World Class used to come on every Saturday, I think around noon. It was on WRGB Channel 6, which was one of the very first television stations in the entire country. And I eventually actually went to work for that television station behind the scenes once upon a time. But that's where I fell in love with wrestling. The Von Erichs and the Freebirds, all the vibrant characters, the Missing Link, Chris Adams, Gino Hernandez. But I also absolutely fell in love with the professional wrestling manager. People like Gary Hart, one of my absolute strongest managerial influences. Percy Pringle, who would later become Paul Bearer, another huge influence. But the style of that promotion absolutely began to mold and shape the vibrant personality that is Barnabas the Ringmaster, or one of your favorites, Barnabas the Producer.
Did you growing up there, you're in New York and you're watching Texas wrestling, Southern wrestling, which, you know, still has kind of a bad rap when you work in Memphis. Oh, well, you know, it's the Memphis style. That's what they used to call it. And you being from New York, you know, Vince Russo has a saying, everybody from the South hates people in New York, especially Jim Cornette. He especially hates people in New York. But you grow up, you're looking at Texas wrestling. This is a total different thing than WWF. And if you didn't grow up watching World Class and you just watched WWF, you would notice the total difference. When did you discover there was something else out there?
So fairly early on, I got turned on to the many wrestling magazines. Obviously, you know, we all call them the Apter Mags, named after Bill Apter. And you've been around a hot minute, my friend. So,
and we've had Bill Apter here, and he says that's just one of those things that it turned into being called the Apter Mags because of him.
He had such a strong influence. I've been very blessed to have an opportunity to speak with Bill on a few different occasions, and you know, I've told him the fact that, you know, over the years, my love affair with wrestling, like, I could contribute it to the magazines, but in a lot of ways, I trace it back to Bill, because Bill's connections, Bill's presentation, you know, the fact that he was able to spotlight a business that was very much closed off to the public and made it accessible for you and myself and a lot of us through those magazines. It was huge. I mean, those magazines were very much the passport to the world, so to speak. Not just the wrestling world, but just the world. Just seeing pictures of the UK and Australia and Japan and Mexico, and just, you know, eyes, you know, just completely wide open at the thought of the possibility of maybe one day. And it was through those magazines that I, you know, fell in love with, you know, the Road Warriors. I specifically remember they were on the cover of PWI at one point and just being mesmerized by their look. You know, Ric Flair and the NWA, and those magazines also introduced me to Memphis wrestling.
Oh, wow.
Jerry Lawler, Andy Kaufman, Jimmy Hart, et cetera, et cetera. So it began my fascination with learning more about the territory. And where I lived, we didn't get Memphis wrestling on our television at all. So my only access to you know, the art, the Memphis wrestling art, was through the magazines, or later when I got my first VCR through Finger Hut. You remember Finger Hut?
Oh my God! I've told the same story, my brother. That's where we got ours from, Finger Hut. And
so I grew up in upstate New York. I was just out of range of where cable would go, and this was when satellite dishes were like you know, I grew up very poor, so.
Me too, my brother. Me too.
A lot of commonality.
You know what? You know what my dad used to call Finger Hut?
What's that?
It was where poor people got electronics.
Pretty much, man. Pretty much. But because I couldn't get cable, like, I just fantasized about finally getting a VCR. And when I finally was able to get one through our friends at Finger Hut, I started getting these VHS tapes, and I got all kinds of tapes, anything I could get at retail stores, all kinds of oddities that I could find. But then there was a series of VHS tapes that were released called Wrestling Gold. And they covered a ton of the Memphis territory.
Right.
You know, things like a lot of footage of Joe LeDuc and Lawler, the tag match between The Rock and Roll and Randy Savage and Lanny Poffo, where Randy pile drove Ricky through a table, which I believe is the first time anyone's been put through a table. But all the fire, all the antics, all the craziness of Memphis, is like, how could you not be a fan of the absolute splendid insanity that is Memphis? And over the years, because I didn't have access to TV, like, YouTube has been an absolute godsend.
Oh, yes.
I've been able to go on and like rediscover. I just, not too long ago, like, just to show you the obscurity of the things that I've been finding, like, obviously Tommy Dreamer is a regular with us now in Memphis wrestling. And I knew obviously about the whole Jerry Lawler, Jim Cornette, you know, rivalry with ECW back in the 97, 98 timeframe. But like, the idea of those guys coming to Memphis, especially Tommy back in, like, you know, 1997, I had no idea. So just little things like that are all brand new to me. So it's just rediscovering the brand, rediscovering the product, stumbling upon things that I've never seen before, realizing that Memphis, I've always known, has been an incredibly influential territory, but to look at just the mass of superstar talent that has gone through those doors and has worked in that area is absolutely mind-blowing. So, when you have somebody the caliber of The Rock who comes to Memphis, and everywhere else he's going, he's absolutely just dogging people with that heel persona, that final boss persona. But when he comes to Memphis, he stops in his tracks and goes, "We're not doing that here because I love Memphis."
Right.
I don't know how much more of a stamp of approval that a territory or a city could get, but I love Memphis wrestling.
Well, I grew up watching. So you're looking at me every 11 o'clock every Saturday morning for an hour and a half, and I would. My mom took me. The neighbors across the street, the kids were going to. Well, I was a kid, but the kids were going to wrestling that night, while my dad and his dad went to the bars. So our moms took us to wrestling, and I was hooked from then on. And I would watch. My grandmother and my mom wanted to leave at 12 o'clock so we could go to lunch and shop. And I'd only get that first hour. I didn't get the 90 minutes. I had a question, but that was me. I mean, I grew up I maybe missed at one point until the 90s when I got out of college and owned my own business. I had not missed a Memphis show. I had seen some of a Memphis, and then, you trade. I actually started trading VHSs, and I'm not going to admit this, but I think maybe I might have sold some too. I might have. Kayfabe. But yeah, I mean,
will be made after this episode.
That's how I got to learn about everything everywhere. But you said a couple things. Number one, that Memphis and noticing Memphis and all the people that came through Memphis. I go through rabbit holes on YouTube now because when you was growing up and you saw the Flair Lawler thing, you thought you'd never see it again. And I can watch it. We can quit right now and go watch it if you want to. I mean, that's how it is.
Sure.
But if you get in a rabbit hole in Pacific North, if you go to Portland and watch their TV and their style, and then watch the people that come through it, it's just so fun to watch the old territories and the way they did things. Not always one of those guys that says, the new wrestling's bad. I don't do that. I like all styles of wrestling. What I wanted to ask you when you was talking about those magazines, and I had the hardest problem because remember you actually
You're
set
gonna
it
ask
up.
me about those advertisements for the apartment wrestling.
I was going to ask you, did you do like I did? You went through them to decide which magazine you bought because it had those advertisements in it? Look. All right, this one's got, because I could get one. I could maybe afford one. There's no way I was going to go home. No, I was going to ask you. There's a couple things at the magazines I always crack up thinking about them. Was there somebody that Bill put over, like huge, and then the first time you saw them, you was like, wait, I don't get it. I don't know why he's so popular. I don't know why Bill likes him so much. Is there anybody there? And the pronunciation of the names, Barnabas. DiBiase was, I never watched Georgia Championship Wrestling. I had no, his name was DiBiase forever in my household. Well, it was just me, but in my mind, that's what his name was. So anybody you could think of?
That Bill hyped.
And you're going to die when I tell you who he hyped, and everybody on this show is going to say, BT, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. But I'll tell you who I was not impressed with, still not a fan of, even back then. So,
do you want me to go first?
Yeah, go ahead. Tell me.
Okay. So, they're really the only person that really comes. There's two people. And I'm going to bring them up, and this is no disrespect to either one of them because they are both absolute all-time greats.
I'll say the same when I say mine. Yeah.
You know, but you know what one, and it's not so much that even Bill throughout the course of wrestling history, at least his first run in the WWF, or it might have been WWF at the point when he was champ, but Bob Backlund's first run as WWF champion, he never did it for me.
Never did it for me neither.
There was nothing about him, and I don't know so much if Bill was necessarily on his gravy train, so to speak, but it's just somebody that came to mind that's been overhyped. Now his second run as the psychotic character, that's right up my alley. But the first run, just dry, bland, horrible promo, just great athlete, but just did nothing for me. The only other person, and again, I don't even know how much Bill really promoted him, and I've met him on a number of occasions, and he's such a good guy, and he is an incredible talent. Ronnie Garvin, especially as a NWA World Champion, I think
I'm the only person alive that's, I'm the guy that likes matches that nobody likes, or the wrestlers nobody likes, and I'd be the only one that did. I don't know.
I did like him. I did like him as, when he, strangely enough, the time that I really started to dig Ronnie Garvin was when he came to the WWF, and when he had the run with Greg Valentine.
See, I don't even remember
the Garvin
that.
Stomp and the whole time. So that's where I really became a fan of Ronnie. But when it came to that build leading to the NWA title run, it made no sense, and it felt like it took the NWA title down a notch. And I understand from watching enough shoot interviews why they did what they did at that point, but I never really saw it. But again, I don't even know if I can necessarily say that Bill was trying to push or promote him, but
I think part of that was because he did win the belt, and then you started seeing him on the cover with the belt, and that was
that's definitely part of it. I do remember Bill. I'm getting kind of sidetracked here on a little bit of a tangent, but I remember the stories in the magazines where they would try to blur fantasy and reality. And I remember specifically reading a story at one point in one of the mags that had to do with Kabuki and Muda. And it was this brother.
Was it that they were related, or that was his dad?
Wild out there story. And even as a kid, wanting to believe, begging to believe, I'm reading this going, man, this is some absolute hobby. I love Kabuki, and I absolutely love Muda.
I understand.
Gary Hart, I love.
Oh yeah, I didn't get keyed in on it. This was before I started getting kayfabe sheets, so I was still getting the magazines.
Mm-hmm.
And Lawler wrote a letter to Aftermags, and I went to get an autograph for Lawler at a local place here. He was doing a personal appearance, and he signed something for me. I said, I couldn't believe you sent that letter to Bill After. And he's like, I didn't send that. I mean, he would not even go with it. And I was like, oh, yeah, maybe we got some stuff that's just not on the up and up there. But my guy, oh, God, I've said this a couple times on the show, but don't make it a big deal, because I got a lot of people in the North, but Bruno Sammartino was not my guy. Yes, Bro. I know. What the legend. I will not take anything away from him, but could not, after Bill had talked about him for years, and the first time I saw him, remember, I like the Lawler style. I like the Moondogs. I like the Fabs. And I'm looking at Bruno Sammartino, who's this big, hairy guy, this bear of a guy, if I might say. And I'm just like, he's slow. He's, just not what I like about wrestling. And for all this time, and I do a podcast with two ladies from New Jersey, and they have mentioned, we just got started for the last 12 weeks. They've got Bruno Sammartino, and I've just sat back here like this, like, I better not.
So Bruno, like, I love Bruno, but Bruno also, I'm a New York guy. So,
Right.
it's like I started with world class, but it's not like it ended with world class. Like, my first, you talked about going to live wrestling when you were a kid. My first live event was Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant
Oh
versus
God.
Kong Bundy and Big John Studd at the Glens Falls Civic Center, maybe 85. So
Wow.
around that time. So I mean, there's a lot of WWF history too, but Bruno is absolutely the case of a great. He did well in different markets and he did well at points overseas, but he was very much a regional talent.
Yes.
And
Yes.
and honestly, Jerry was a regional talent until he moved into commentary and went to work
Sure.
for
Yeah.
Vince.
Yeah. You're right.
And
Yeah.
then,
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
he was over everywhere. But for the longest time, his flavor of ice cream was just, it made sense for that area. I mean, there's certainly people, you mentioned Portland. Roddy transcended Portland, but there are other people that, I don't know if Buddy Rose
Maybe
did get
it's
over to the different
AEW run.
areas.
Is
He, he,
AEW run?
he,
Maybe.
he had a good AWA run and he had a little cup of coffee in WWF, but for the most part, like Portland was his territory. And a lot could even say people like Matt Bourne, who, obviously he had the run as Doink and Big Josh. And I mean, he worked everywhere, but I don't know if there was another place. Billy Jack.
Hey, Barnabas, let me tell you, we do a Patreon and we'll do 5 questions at the end. And
Okay.
I'll tell you why the guys went to Portland and worked
All
on
right.
Patreon only. So yeah, it's kind of adult, but I'll tell you the reason why. Let's talk about you going from the fan to getting into business. Why did you want to be in the business?
Why did I want to be in the business?
Same reason I got into business, because it was just something you just had to do, kind of thing.
So I'll try to make this. I'll give you the Campbell soup condensed version.
All right.
So, but I'll try to make it as brief but still entertaining as I can. So I've been fascinated with wrestling ever since I was a little boy, probably 5 or 6 years old at the oldest. It has been the one constant in my life. People come and go, finances come and go, women come and go. I love the ladies, but it happens. But wrestling has always been there. It has been my escape. It's been my salvation. It's been my muse. As many people in the business say, it's my mistress. What you know as well as I do, once you get bit by the wrestling bug, you're hooked no matter what. So when I first decided to start training to be involved with wrestling, my original goal was to be a wrestler. It wasn't to be a manager. It wasn't to be a commentator or announcer or anything. It was to be a wrestler. For a long time, I didn't think it was possible because, growing up in an era where giants ruled, Hulk and Andre and, Big John Studd and all these massive muscular guys, it wasn't really until Bret Hart ascended to a singles spotlight role as WWF champion where I'm like, well, man, I'm actually the same height as Bret. Maybe this isn't such a impossibility after all. And that probably sounds crazy for somebody that is familiar primarily with Memphis wrestling, because most of the Memphis guys were more normal sized guys.
Right. Yeah.
But,
The first time
I
remember meeting the first time I was backstage and got, real close. Dundee, I was a taller man than Dundee.
Sure. Yes.
Lawler, me and Lawler are the same size man. We're, shoulders, the whole thing. We're the same size.
For sure. So
it wasn't, yeah.
Everybody looks like absolute larger than life superstars on TV, but then you meet some of these folks and you realize like these are normal sized people. But being in that New York area and that New York territory, you look around and you go like, there's no way I could ever do this. But then Bret, one of the greatest of all time, but Bret showed me that maybe it was possible. So I started training, maybe 98, 99, somewhere around that range, at a spot in Schenectady, New York, World of Hurt Wrestling. There's a version of it that still exists that's run by a fellow manager, Kenny Casanova, right now. And that's where I cut my teeth on wrestling. And I was there for a time, and I did a little bit. I was dealing with some back and neck issues, so I stepped away from the business, always with the intention of getting back.
Was there anybody there that, you know, in the train, either in your class or the trainer, that people would know for today?
Oh, he would occasionally stop into training. He was involved in the area. It was one of the Baldies from ECW. Tony something.
I can't
I feel terrible that I don't remember his last name, but HC Loke was another one. He did some time with ECW towards the end of their run. Salvatore Sincere.
Tom Brandy, yeah.
Tom Brandy. Tom Brandy was well known in that area. So those were all people that were, you know, and then a lot of the guys there were journeyman wrestlers. They were folks that would do enhancement work for WWE or, you know, ECW or WCW even at that point. One of my best friends, Steve Cruz, I met through there. He was involved in a tag team, but mostly a regional talent, an excellent regional talent, but very much a regional talent. But I did my initial training. I stepped away, always with the intention of coming back. I moved from New York to Las Vegas. I was looking to get back into the scene there. There was really not. Now there's a bit of a scene in Vegas. At that point, there was like nothing. I almost ended up going to California to train with, to continue training with Rick Bassman's Ultimate Pro Wrestling. I went and toured facilities there in San Clemente and El Segundo. For those that aren't familiar, Rick Bassman's the one that's noted as discovering Sting in the Ultimate Warrior.
Right, yeah.
He's had a hand in training. I mean, when I was out there looking, it was probably shortly after the time that like John Cena and people like that had moved on. But like Cena was there, Samoa Joe was there, Frankie Kazarian was there. A lot of guys, Victoria, a lot of folks were there. I went. I just couldn't do the cost of living. Then I started looking at Cincinnati and possibly Louisville, because at that point, HWA was still a developmental territory for WWE, and obviously OVW was a developmental for WWE. So I ended up moving out, and life, failed relationships, financial issues, a lot of things sidetracked me to where, honestly, I thought that the wrestling dream had passed me by. I'm like, I'm too old. I'm never going to be able to resume this. And I actually started getting into doing ringside photography and video work, much like Jim Cornette, much like Paul Heyman.
That was the first thing I did. I took photographs, sent them to Bill Apter. I mean, that's how a lot of people get in the business.
Yes. So I had no intention at that point of trying to parlay that into getting back into the business. I just knew that again, you get bit by the bug and you can't deny it. So I just knew that I wanted to be more involved, and, I started getting involved with the photography and video work. And then I was, working with MMA promotions and boxing and live music. But ultimately, performing and being fully involved in the business is, in my heart of hearts, it's what I've always wanted to do. And in 2018, it's like that switch got flipped in my mind where I finally decided, you got some miles on you. You probably can't do a full wrestling schedule, but you can wrestle every now and then. And you definitely can talk, and you definitely can entertain. So, and I'd been in enough locker rooms at that point to see like the young talent coming up were athletically amazing, but when it came to character work and promo, like they needed help. And quite frankly, the younger cats out there just needed they needed good people that could help mentor them, because it was like the blind leading the blind. It was just, one inexperienced guy leading another. And at times when veterans were around, I'm not saying this is true across the board everywhere, but sometimes people were taking advantage of younger talent. So like I just saw these opportunities like, okay, I could be a mentor. I could help with promo. I could help entertain. Like there's a lot of things I knew that I could do in a managerial role. And I love the role of the manager. Like I said before, Gary Hart, Percy, Jimmy Hart, obviously, Cornette, Heenan, et cetera, et cetera. So I resumed my training with Cody Hawk here in Cincinnati. Cody is the individual who trained John Moxley, Sami Callihan, LA Knight. Just an excellent trainer, very patient. Believe it or not, I am not a natural athlete. I know it's hard to tell by looking at me.
Yeah,
but,
I wrestled until I started doing gimmick matches as a referee. I mean, as a manager, you do gimmick matches, but I wrestled 18 matches, and I took a look at those matches on video and said, I suck. So let's find out. Yeah, let's find out. And I want you to know and I'm not talking about Memphis wrestling. I'm talking about the other shows around. Maybe there is some guys that I might be still a better worker than them. They didn't watch their videotapes, but I did. And then I realized, and I say this to Dustin all the time, in the wrestling business, if you want to be in the wrestling business, there's always, I ran shows. And somebody said, "What can I do?" Well, you don't want to be no, I don't want to be a wrestler, but put chairs out, set up the ring. I mean, do whatever. Hey, we need somebody on a popcorn machine. I mean, seriously, there's something to do if you want to be part of professional wrestling. There are I guess it's about 7, 8, maybe 9 years ago. They had a show here in Jonesboro, and they said, BT, we want you to come out and watch this show, blah, blah, blah. And they were trying to set up. I just jumped in and started helping them. And they're like, we didn't want you to come do that. And I go, that's what you do. That's what you do. But there's always a role for somebody.
But that is to take it a little bit off on a side note, that's what we do. That's what ties us to the carnival and the circus days, is that the troupe would come in together, unified, set up, get everything ready. They want each other to do well because it helps to draw a bigger house so that everybody eats and everybody benefits. Then we all work together to tear down and we move to the next town. This is not rocket science. But this is something that's been happening for, decades, if not hundreds of years at this point. And that tradition still lives on today through what we do in the pro wrestling industry, is that sometimes people get it twisted and they don't understand. They start thinking like, oh, well, I'm too good to do this or I'm too good to do that. No, you're not. None of us are.
I promoted shows and was setting up the ring almost every time. I was one of the guys. And it was just one of those things you did. Let's take a quick commercial break. And when we come back, we're going to, how did we get involved in this incarnation of Memphis wrestling with Barnabas, the leader? God, that was really bad, wasn't it? That was